Welcome to 60 Skills. We will now discuss how fiction writers work. Fiction writers are an interesting bunch, and keep in mind the volume of material that they can cover is quite immense. Dealing with things like true crime novels, which in many cases are narrowly focused versions of reality, to things that are completely fantastical, such as the works of Tolkien. So keep in mind, what you are going to look for is just as important as how you go about looking for it. All right, so first of all, you need to have some idea of what you want to write about. And keep in mind, there are many different ways to do this, but most importantly, having an idea of what you want to write about will greatly enhance the results you are going to get from this. If not, if you are simply doing this in the magical community as we refer to as raw, you will come up with something useful, but it may or may not be something that you enjoy terribly much. Next, you need to understand how most fiction writers work. If you read the work called On Writing by Stephen King, what you'll find is that he very clearly describes his muse as a man in a bowler cap, and when that man speaks, it is pure gold. To those of us familiar with evocation, mediumship, and various meditative skills, this is something quite clear indeed, and not something that is commonly made out to be. Stephen King is clearly in communication with the spirit world. Now, this can be pursued through a couple of different mediums, pun intended. First of all, the way most fiction writers work is through a limited form of mediumship, where they don't generally bring the entity into their body, but they do bring it into their mind, and then they proceed to have a conversation with that entity. The longer they do this, the better the relationship they have and the more fleshed out their characters tend to be. This does not diminish their skill as writers. This is merely a way by which they can acquire the information they need to tell their stories. So, what are some good ways to go about doing this? Well, those of you familiar with evocation pretty much now know all you need to know. That said, learning how to engage in this safely and to be able to communicate with the entities clearly enough for it to matter takes quite a bit of skill and quite a bit of time. In this course, we will introduce two alternative methods. The first involves the use of dream yoga, and the second of which involves a kind of mental wandering. Both of these can be learned entirely in this course. That said, if you have already mastered the art of mental wandering, this will go much smoother and much quicker. Now, there are a variety of other ways to do this, and many authors, in order to get into that receptive state, will employ the use of various drugs to include alcohol. Over a long period of time, this is not terribly healthy for them, and one of the reasons why many fiction writers have such ongoing problems with alcoholism and other drug use. The good news is that if you use the methods included in this course, there is no need to damage yourself in that regard. So join 60 Skills today as we learn everything there is to learn about how to be a fiction writer. Welcome to 60 Skills. I will now discuss the requirements for how to be an esoteric fiction writer. For the mechanical requirements, at a minimum, you will require a string of beads, a notebook, and a pen. Additionally, if you have mastered the skill of mental wandering, this will greatly accelerate your results with this material. However, at this point in time, there is no need to have that skill. Everything you need will be contained in this course. Being able to perform mental wandering, however, will greatly accelerate the rate of your results. Let us begin. Welcome to 60 Skills. We will now discuss how to develop a writing style. Up until this point in time, we've mainly discussed how to get access to the information that you're looking for and how to manage your relationship with the muse that you choose to contact. This is well and good and incredibly important. However, we will now get on to another issue that is important. By contacting the muse, you get the story that you need. But you still need the skill or the ability to write that story down in a way that makes your story attractive for other people to read. Okay, what can we do about this? Well, if you're in any way empathic, or if you've learned how to perform build the ball for quite a while, the easiest way to do this is to simply find a writing style that you like. So take a famous author, it doesn't matter who it is, just an author whose writing style you happen to like. Take one of their books. Again, doesn't really even matter which book it is, as long as it is one of their successful ones. Next, hand copy that book 3 times from cover to cover. So every word in that story, write down 3 complete times. So you go through and write out the book by hand once, then you do it 2 more times. While you're doing this, pore breathe. Pore breathing vital energy while you're doing this will allow you to subtly incorporate into your mind that particular writing style. If you're looking for a hybrid writing style, you may want to do this with a couple of different authors. At the end of that 3-time recitation of writing the book out, it's going to be programmed into your subconscious. Again, doing pore breathing while you do this will greatly enhance your results, but surprisingly is not entirely necessary. Some people also like to make a ritual of this. So you write it out 3 times, and then you hold a little ritual where you spiritually thank the author and then maybe burn the handwritten copies. It's really up to you. But by doing this, you are going to subconsciously ingrain in your mind and in your body that particular writing style. Now again, if you don't speak the language you're writing in particularly well, it isn't going to help you with that. But as a general rule, if you do this, you will slowly incorporate those subconscious writing cues successful authors use. And if you do this with 2 or 3 other authors, at the end of that, you are going to end up with a very effective hybrid writing style that you can then take and apply to the story the muse gives you. While there are other ways to do this, this is certainly the quickest. Also keep in mind this can be rather time-consuming. If you're using a very short book like The Great Gatsby, it could take you a week or 2 just to do this once. So don't consider this to be some kind of quick fix. But if you can absorb the writing style of famous authors and make it your own, well, then you have something that a lot of people are going to be attracted to. Because the reality of the matter is, when it comes to stories that people like, the material involved is every bit as important as the ability of the author to tell a good story. This is one of the reasons why, and again, he's one of my favorite examples, Stephen King has been so prolific. He has a very simple writing style that works for a lot of people. The stories he's telling are not particularly earth-shattering one way or another, and would certainly not be considered great literature amongst literary historians. But that said, he is one of the most successful fiction writers of our time, and let's be honest, his stories are a fun read. Ultimately, if you want this to be a business, this is what you need to keep in mind. Let us begin. Welcome to 60 Skills. We will now discuss issues that come up as an esoteric fiction writer. All right, as has been discussed several times in this course, using the esoteric to be a fiction writer, or really just being a fiction writer in general, is for the most part a form of limited mediumship. So on the one hand, mediumship of any kind tends to be extremely energetically taxing. It's one of the reasons why, particularly amongst male fiction writers, sterility and being childless is not terribly uncommon. The simple fact of the matter is energy that is moved from one thing to another has to come from somewhere. So if you're going to engage in this kind of fiction writing, you need to take care of your body and you should be in good health. Otherwise, it can be extremely draining. Additionally, as has been mentioned in this coursework, like attracts like. So if you want to tell pleasant stories or deal with beautiful things, it's helpful for you to live a very clean lifestyle. This means no drugs, no damaging sex, no lack of sleep, no poor nutrition, no engaging in crime, so on and so on and so on. The cleaner your lifestyle and a more positive outlook on life you have tends to flavor the kinds of stories you want. Likewise, if you want to tell horror stories or stories about things related to true crime, there is no need to dirty yourself up. That's not how this works. When you engage in your projection into those mental places, you will just do it with the intention of finding things of this kind. Now again, by dealing with a limited form of mediumship, you are putting yourself in contact with an intelligence foreign to you. At a minimum, this needs to be done in a controlled manner. So when you set up your own internal rules for doing this, you do it with the idea that I only make contact with this entity in a specific place, like your writing room. And I only make contact with the entity for the purpose of writing this story, and when it's over, I don't contact that entity anymore. Many fiction writers discuss how once they've dealt with a particularly difficult character, they have to make an intentional effort to go away from that character and not think about it for a while. Again, this is one of the many issues associated with mediumship. So these are some basic things to keep in mind, is that you will be dealing with a foreign intelligence of one kind or another as your muse for these stories. In doing so, there is an energetic cost. And additionally, if you're looking for one particular kind of entity or another, having a clean lifestyle and a healthy body makes all of this much easier. Finally, you need to set up some ground rules behind how you're going to contact these entities, so once you are done telling their story, they don't continue to hang around. So these are some things to think about in terms of how to structure your esoteric writing practice. Welcome to 60 Skills. We will now discuss the element of dream work in contacting a muse. Many authors talk about how they get their initial inspiration for beginning their various works of fiction in dreams. This is very true. The simple fact of the matter is, the dream gate, as we refer to it in meditative and yogic circles, is one of many ways by which a practitioner can learn how to leave their body. And the advantage to this method is, first off, it's something that most people do every day, and two, generally involves downtime. Now later on in the practice portion of this course, we will get into the specifics of how you want to do this. However, as of right now, we're going to talk a little bit about how to tune yourself into the right wavelength. Now, what you explore in your dreams has a lot to do with how you conduct yourself in your day-to-day life. To an uninterested outside observer, this probably makes sense. But let me explain a little further. Like tends to attract like in the metaphysical worlds. So if you're running around robbing people, stealing things, breaking into houses, violating the law, doing a lot of drugs, cavorting with prostitutes, and otherwise acting in a negative manner, these are the kinds of things that are going to be naturally attracted to you. Additionally, these are the kinds of things that you are going to attract as a muse in your dream state. So what I'm getting at here is that if you're going to engage in this kind of thing in order to attract a muse, you first need to go through the effort to clean up your personal act. Getting adequate sleep, having an adequate diet, avoiding intoxicants, this kind of thing will greatly aid your efforts in performing dream yoga and making contact with something that represents your higher self. This is probably not going to be very helpful for writing a book on true crime or on horror stories. But by the same token, you're not going to be receiving any nightmares by doing your training in this manner either. So keep in mind that like attracts like is a universal principle in metaphysics. And many authors who ended up writing books on darker topics tended to do so while drinking a lot or engaging in a lot of drug use. You don't really want to do this. Now, the one thing that you're going to need to do in advance in this coursework, before we get to this section on dream yoga, is you are going to need to have some idea of what you want to write about. This greatly enhances your ability to meet a spirit figure that is going to have a story to tell you. So keep in mind, this is going to take some work on your end. The easiest way to do this is simply read a bunch of books that interest you. And then you start your dream yoga. Having a defined statement can be helpful, and that can be added into a kind of mantra you are going to use in preparation for your actual dream work. So keep in mind, having a direction of where you want to go is valuable, because the simple fact of the matter is you are going to be projecting yourself into the astral plane when you do this. And the astral plane is a tremendously large place, as we will discuss in a few minutes. Let us begin. Welcome to 60 Skills. We will now discuss the role of mental wandering in being a fiction writer. All right, for those of you already familiar with mental wandering or who already know how to perform this exercise, this is not going to come as a huge surprise to you. However, for everyone else, this is something that you need to pay a lot of attention to. Mental wandering, simply put, is the separation, the willful separation, I might add, of your mental body from your physical and astral body. This is a very safe and very old practice. Once this happens, this subtle body of yours can travel to other places. Some of these places look remarkably like the here and now around us presently. Others can be very far removed from what exists in the physical world. Works of high fiction, high fantasy, high science fiction, for example, are good examples of fantastical worlds viewed via mental wandering. Now, as we stated earlier in the section on dream yoga, it is best for you to have at least some idea of where you want to go. This is important because, for the most part, when you separate your mental body from your physical body and project it outwards, you are going to be projecting your mental body into the astral level of existence. Now, the astral level of existence is defined by constraint, so you are dealing with things that have a shape to them. And again, some of these things can be very similar to objects in the real or material world, or very far removed from it, depending upon where you go. Additionally, the astral plane has a certain timelessness to it, or a timeless quality. This is the reason why things that have been gone for thousands of years can continue to exist on the astral world and occasionally reassert themselves in the here and now. Also, the astral world is characterized by things that we like to refer to as energy. Energy, such as emotion or sensation, is also present there. So a good way to describe the astral world is a place that you can sense, but you can't touch. Well, not touch physically anyway. If you have well-developed clairsentience, you can touch it all you want and even manipulate it. So keep in mind, this is the goal of mental wandering in this context. You are separating your mental body from your physical and astral body and projecting it into another place. Now, once you get there, you simply walk around, look around, observe what you see, and listen to the entities that live there. Things that live in these places have lives of their own, many of which are quite advanced or quite developed, many of which have absolutely nothing with how the world works here. Now that said, things that are particularly bright or things that are particularly dark are the most easy to be attracted to in the mental realms, or in this case, the astral realms using your mental body. Also keep in mind that you get to choose where you go. If you project into a place and you don't like the story you're seeing, Simply project your mind someplace else. In the beginning, I would advise starting with maybe 15 to 20-minute sessions with this. With time, you can work this up. Now, at a certain point, you are going to run into a spirit figure that you like. When you do this, you should wait until the spirit figure speaks to you first. This is extremely important. Never speak to an entity first, let them speak to you. When it does, ask the entity for a symbol. And you can write this symbol later on down on a sheet of paper or a note card. You will then want to keep this symbol to yourself. Do not show this to other people, as this essentially acts like a phone call to the entity in question. Then, when you're ready, simply ask the entity to tell you a story. This is the entire basis of using mental wondering in limited mediumship to be an esoteric writer. Now, of course, there are risks involved in talking to various entities. If you choose not to take this approach, what you can do instead is learn to project your mind into these places at will and simply return to the same spot over and over again in order to observe what is occurring. Doing this can put you in places where they demonstrate high technology, ancient rituals, magic of all kinds, great adventure stories, you name it. You might even make some friends along the way. But keep in mind, using mental wondering to be a fiction writer is also an excellent segue into becoming a full-on magician. And believe it or not, there are more than a few of us floating around in fiction writing circles. Let us begin. Welcome to 60 Skills. We will now discuss the various merits and disadvantages of either being involved in independent publishing or going through a conventional publishing house. First, let's state the obvious. Publishing your own work of fiction via independent publishing online is a far easier task initially than getting a publishing house to publish your book for you. The costs are relatively low, and you will need to bear most of those. It can also be done relatively quickly, so if you are in a mode where you have established an audience, this allows you to publish any number of works of fiction very quickly without needing to worry about a release schedule as defined by a given publishing house. Now we will talk about the advantages of going through a conventional publishing house. The primary advantage is you will not have to do your own marketing. This will be entirely handled, for the most part, by the publishing house. They have professionals that do this. They also have professional copywriters in-house and professional cover designers for your book as well. In short, other than simply needing to write the book, everything else will be handled by the publishing firm, including the release schedule. And depending upon how successful you are, you may even find that they give you an advance. However, this is becoming increasingly rare in this day and age. Now let's talk a brief bit about the disadvantages of both. With independent publishing, as was previously mentioned, you have to pay for all of your own setup. This involves a professional copy editor, hiring someone to design the cover, and most importantly, conducting all of your own marketing. Simply put, the idea that build it and they will come works is, in my experience, untrue. Marketing can make the difference between an inferior product being a bestseller and a superior product going completely unnoticed. It is also a skill that takes some time to develop. Now, depending upon when you are listening to this recording, the different mechanisms in play for independent publishing may have changed quite a great deal. In this case, we are basically talking about online marketing. You have to learn how to use all of the various online media giants in order to get word out regarding your works. This can be both time-consuming and difficult to learn how to do. And I can tell you from personal experience, going from the standpoint of organic growth of various online media is frustratingly slow and will result in your being in the poorhouse for quite some time. However, as an independent publisher, or independent writer who publishes their own works, you will keep the lion's share of the profits from whatever work you have written. You will also have ultimate control over what in fact gets published. This can both be an advantage or a disadvantage, keeping in mind publishing houses have an excellent nose for what sells and what does not, and their suggestions from your editor are oftentimes invaluable in disciplining a loose mind, particularly amongst new writers. Now, the disadvantage to going through a conventional publishing house is, one, getting them to accept your work. This can be very, very difficult. These companies invest large amounts of money in getting new books to market, and the simple fact of the matter is they have almost as many losers as they have winners. Because of this, they tend to be highly concerned with approaching the right kind of talent. Also keep in mind, the works they tend to sell are often falling upon very specific lines and guide with the publishing house. So if your vision of what you want to have published is not in line with the kind of media that the publishing house creates, then you simply are not going to get picked up by them for the most part. Additionally, keep in mind, authors keep very little of the profits from their books when going through a conventional publishing house. Almost none in point of fact. At the time of this recording, a top-end author might collect 3 to 5% of the royalties for a book from the cover price of a book that they sell. The publishing house keeps everything else. Now, this is not out of pure greed. As I mentioned earlier, they have a variety of things that they need to do. The most important of which is they handle all of the marketing for their stable of authors. This in turn frees an author to spend more time writing. However, as my favorite example in this series, Stephen King, pointed out, he made all of his money by licensing his books for use in film. This is quite literally how he became wealthy, not through the actual writing of books. A highly successful author will tend to have a decent lifestyle. There is a lot of celebrity that goes along with it, but there simply put is not much money. This is because, again, publishing houses sponsor any number of writers, most of whom are not terribly successful. The few that are essentially carrying water for everyone else. And keep in mind, the publishing houses are also providing any number of services: professional copy editing, editors who can guide their writers towards a more saleable product, professional cover design, professional distribution, etc., etc., etc. So keep in mind, as of the time of this recording, those are the two main ways forward that you can go. You can either publish your works independently and have a lot of control over what you do, but you will also be doing a lot of work that is not directly related to writing, or you can go through a conventional publishing house that will handle all of these details for you, but in turn keep most of the profits from the sale of the book. Which you choose to engage in is also important. Again, as of the time of this recording, works that are released independently, to my knowledge, are almost never picked up by major publishing houses. The publishing houses will openly say that this is because most independently published works are not very good. This is also a true statement. However, it is very difficult for them to wring much profit out of a book that has already been released. So you need to understand their point of view on this as well. So ultimately, if you're going to be a successful fiction writer, this is your first really important decision to make, and it may be something that you wish to make before you've even finished writing your first book. Let us begin.